Hello, everyone. I'm coming to you live from Washington, D.C. This is Lowe's Logic, the way I see the world and the way I believe it sees me. It's Tuesday, October the 4th, and it's a little after 7:38. I wanted to talk to you this morning about stress. So, recently, I've had the opportunity to speak with some young people, the first of which was my granddaughter, who's 20. And one of the things that I realized from talking to her is that she is experiencing some stress. So I just, of course, as I do, I tried to give her some advice. And one of the things that I recognize is that stress is like poison. And I believe I heard it somewhere that if you're ever bitten by a poisonous snake, that your response to the bite could be an increased heart rate, which, if you look at it logically, would propel the poison through your body at a faster rate than if you suddenly found a way to be calm and or sort of relaxed. Doesn't mean you're going to not die, or in this case, doesn't mean the stress is not going to remain there, or the issue or the concern that is the basis for the stress. It's not going to go away, but how you're able to cope with it. So think about it. You've been poisoned. You're lying there. Your life is leaving you. And then if you can slow that down, help may arrive. And in this case of help, when we talk about stress, it is talking to people who you trust. Talking, and by trust, of course you can trust them, but you also have to filter and ensure that they're people who are able to give you the proper advice. You wouldn't go to a mechanic for a cake to be baked, and you wouldn't go to a baker to get your spark plugs changed. So you can have a cadre of friends or trusted people or even professionals, but ensure that they work for you. In other words, that their support, information, therapy, prescription, they actually work for you. So I challenge you this morning to look at how you cope with stress. What exactly is your mechanism for dealing with when you are faced with a project, a situation, a bill, a health crisis, a child that's not listening? How do you deal with that? What is your ability? What have you developed to cope with your stress? Now, I'll tell you what works for me, and I'll tell you what doesn't work for me. Maybe I should tell you what doesn't work for me. What doesn't work for me when I'm in a stressful situation is to allow it to control my presence, my physical presence, my emotional presence. It allows me to just, I allow it, I should say, to affect my mood. I may have been happy and a stressful thing happens and suddenly I'm not happy anymore. And I'm not going to say that, when you're faced with stress, suddenly you should remain happy, because that would be kind of silly. Of course, you acknowledge it, and once you acknowledge it, the next thing you do is immediately decide, am I going to allow this to control the next thing, the next breath, the next part of my life, or am I going to say, you know what, hey stress, how are you? Come on in, let me grab you, hug you, and say, look, you're done. I'm not going to allow you to ruin this day for me. So you can whisper in stress's ear. Now, it's kind of silly, but what I'm trying to say is that we, you, I, all of us, we need to have a tool bag, a kit, something that we have within inside of us that when stress is upon us, we can embrace it, accept it, and not allow it to debilitate us or slow us down. Now, people use all kinds of things to cope with stress. What does not work for me is any type of mind or mood altering substance. I'm not one to shy away from trying new things, but I'm not one who can take a pill, a drink, a drug, or any other type of, okay, let's forget about this, because what happens is you're not actually relieving yourself of the stress, what you're doing is you're dulling the main tool that you have, which is your brain, and you're just putting a sort of pause on the stress rather than embracing it. Because once you embrace anything in your life, the moment you embrace it, you're beginning to solve the issue, the problem, the challenge. It may take 10 years, it may take 10 minutes. But if you put it off because you want to just not deal with it, I think of a story of a family member when we were little. They lit something on fire, and rather than call for help or try to put it out, they threw it in the closet. That wasn't a good idea, by the way. The long and short of it is that was a child. We're adults. So our response to how we deal with our fires is relatively important, because if we don't deal with it in a productive fashion, we will likely have negative outcomes. So look at your stress. What works for you? For me, what works for me? Exercise. What works for me? Talking to a trusted person or persons, specifically people who I vetted, who I filtered to be qualified and competent to be able to support me mentally and spiritually cope with my stress. Everyone is not there for you, people, in that way. People who love you may sometimes be the most toxic in terms of support when you are in a stressful situation. I'll repeat that. People who love you, who you love, sometimes can be the most toxic in supporting you through a stressful situation. Doesn't mean they don't love you. Doesn't mean you don't love them. It means they may not be qualified to help you deal with what you need at that moment. It's not a rub on them. They may learn to be that person. They may grow to be that person. But if you know that when you talk to someone that you love, someone you trust, someone who's a friend, and the problem doesn't seem lessened, it may even be exacerbated, you might need to rethink that. So all I'm doing today is saying, to you, think about it. How are you coping with your stress? What works for you? And when you talk about what works for you, ask yourself this question. Are the things you use to cope with stress healthy, or are they creating potentially dangerous outcomes down the road? If you go to eating when you're stressed, could you be eating too much? Could you be eating the wrong things? If you go to drinking, and I'm talking about alcoholic beverages, don't knock that at all. However, if it doesn't work for you, are you doing more of it than you should? Are you finding that you're relying on it more than you should? And then are you shopping? Are you gambling? There are many ways to divert stress that are not healthy because the stress is not relieved. For me, and I'm not an expert on anything, but I know what works for me. Walking, running, some form of exercise, some sort of quiet time to sort of flush the problem out and think about it. Prayer, talking to people that you trust who are capable and qualified. And be mindful, people. They may not be giving you the answer that you want, right? So that's a whole nother thing. That's a whole nother topic of discussion. Do we want the medicine with sugar in it, or do we want it straight without a chaser and end up with the desired outcome? So figure out what your stress is. Figure out how you cope with it. Ask yourself, does your coping mechanisms work, or do they work and cause you different problems? In other words, do they delay your stress, or do they help you breathe through it? Remember, the snake bites you, the poison enters you. If you get excited, the poison propels through your body at a faster rate. If the snake bites you, you calm yourself down. The poison doesn't go away, i.e. the stress doesn't go away. It's still there, but it may allow you more time to get the help that you need. Folks, I love you. This has been Lowe's Logic. Keep your heart, spirit, and minds right. Be at peace. You can follow me on Spotify, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Audible, iHeartRadio, Samsung, Podchaser, or YouTube. And thanks. Have a wonderful day. Bye.